Imagine a man so righteous and upright that even God himself described him as unique in his generation. This man was Job, and his life would become the stage for one of the most profound and mysterious stories in the Bible. Living in the land of Uz, Job was known not only for his immense wealth and prosperity, but above all for his unwavering faithfulness to God. He was a devoted father, offering continuous sacrifices on behalf of his children, fearing that they might have sinned against the Lord at any moment. The Bible describes Job as a man who turned away from evil and pursued holiness above all else. His household thrived, his herds multiplied, and his influence in the region was unquestionable. He had everything anyone could ever desire: health, family, wealth, and most importantly, a blameless life before God. Yet while Job lived in abundance and blessing, a completely different scene was unfolding in the spiritual realm. A conversation in the heavens was about to change his life forever. That conversation would reveal that Job's faith was not built merely on prosperity and blessings, but on something far deeper. And so begins one of the greatest lessons of trust, patience, and perseverance ever recorded. While Job's life seemed perfect in the land of Uz, a grand scene was unfolding in the heavens. The sons of God, that is, the angels, presented themselves before the Lord to report their activities. Among them came Satan, the adversary, the one who roams the earth, seeking whom he may accuse. God, who knows the hearts of men, asked the enemy where he had come from. He replied, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord highlighted his servant Job as an example of faithfulness and righteousness. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." But Satan refused to accept this testimony. He accused Job of serving God only out of self-interest. He questioned whether Job's loyalty was not tied to the blessings he enjoyed. Boldly, he declared, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him, his household, and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike all that he has, and surely he will curse you to your face." In that scene, the heart of the accuser was revealed. He did not believe that a man could truly love God in a pure and selfless way. For Satan, faith was nothing more than a trade of benefits. But God knew Job and understood that his devotion went far beyond wealth, children, or health. So the Lord allowed the test. Satan could touch all of Job's possessions and even his family, but he would not have power over Job's life. This permission was not God's abandonment, but the beginning of a revelation that would echo through generations. While Job sat peacefully in his home, rejoicing with his family, he could not imagine that in the spiritual realm, his very name was being spoken before the Creator himself. His faithful heart was about to be tested at a level no ordinary man could bear. The story now took the shape of a cosmic battle. On one side, Satan insisting that human faith cannot survive without reward. On the other, God placing his trust in the integrity of his servant. Job's life was about to become living proof that it is possible to love God for who he is, and not merely for what he gives. Without Job realizing it, the divine permission was already in motion, and Satan was preparing to strike everything he possessed. Then, in a single day, a sequence of disasters crashed into his life like an unstoppable storm. The first messenger arrived running with the dreadful news. The Sabeans had raided the fields, stolen the oxen and donkeys, and killed the servants with the sword. Job had barely a moment to absorb it when another messenger appeared, breathless, carrying an even greater tragedy. The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, consuming them all. While that second man was still speaking, yet another rushed in with more bad news. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties, attacked the camels, carried them away, and slew the servants with the sword. It was a relentless succession of losses, wave after wave of calamity. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. A 4th messenger arrived with the heaviest sorrow a father could hear. "Your sons and daughters were feasting in the home of your eldest brother. Suddenly, a mighty wind swept in from the desert, struck the house, and it collapsed on them. All of them are dead." In a single day, Job lost his herds, his wealth, his servants, and above all his beloved children. Everything that once filled his life with joy and pride was ripped away in an instant. The pain seemed unbearable, but his response would become one of the greatest testimonies of faith ever recorded. He tore his robe, shaved his head in mourning, and fell to the ground in worship, declaring, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, Job did not curse God. His heart, shattered by grief, remained steadfast in trust. What seemed to be the end was, in truth, only the beginning of an even greater trial. Even after such devastation, Job remained faithful, refusing to curse God. But Satan was not satisfied. In another heavenly assembly, he once again stood before the Lord. God bore witness to his servant, saying, "He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without reason." The adversary replied, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and surely he will curse you to your face." Then God allowed Satan to go further, placing only one boundary. Job's life could not be taken. It was at this moment that one of the most painful phases of his trial began. Satan afflicted Job with malignant sores, covering his entire body from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The pain was so unbearable that Job sat among the ashes, scraping his wounds with shards of pottery. His appearance, once honorable and respected, was now marked by misery and humiliation. The wealthiest and most upright man of Uz had become unrecognizable, swallowed by physical and emotional torment. Even his wife, overwhelmed by despair, could no longer endure the sight of his suffering. She approached him and said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job answered firmly, "You speak as a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not also adversity?" In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. His trial had now reached its deepest point. His body was in agony, his family destroyed, and his possessions lost. Everything suggested failure and abandonment, yet Job's faith still shone, faintly but unwavering amid the ashes. The weight of his affliction and the silence of his solitude became a constant struggle. And soon the arrival of his friends would add another layer to this story, not of comfort, but of questioning. The news of Job's suffering spread quickly, and 3 of his closest friends decided to visit him. They were Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. But when they arrived, they could hardly recognize him. His body was disfigured, his face marred by pain, his dignity consumed by sickness. When they saw his condition, they tore their robes in grief, threw dust into the air, and sat with him on the ground. For 7 days and 7 nights, not a single word was spoken. They remained in silence, for they saw that his anguish was beyond words. Perhaps this silence was the greatest act of empathy they ever offered. But after those days of quiet mourning, Job could no longer hold back his heart. He opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He did not curse God, but he lamented the moment he came into the world. His words poured out as a bitter lament, a confession that the pain of his soul now weighed heavier than the pain of his flesh. It was then that his friends began to speak. Eliphaz the first hinted that no one suffers like this without reason, suggesting Job must have hidden sin in his life. Bildad reinforced the accusation, even pointing to the death of Job's children as possible proof of their wrongdoing. And Zophar was the harshest of all, declaring that Job deserved even more than what he was enduring. These words did not comfort. They pierced like daggers. Instead of finding solace, Job now faced condemnation from those who should have offered support. His loneliness was no longer just physical or emotional. It became a deep, spiritual isolation. From that moment on, long dialogues began, filled with accusations, rebuttals, and cries of despair. Yet even in his pain, Job refused to surrender his integrity. He defended his innocence and kept searching for God, though he could not comprehend why such suffering had befallen him. The words of his friends wounded Job deeply. Instead of finding comfort, he felt increasingly accused, as if his suffering were proof of hidden sins he must have committed. It was as though the loss of his children and the torment of his body were not enough. Now he had to endure the crushing weight of being misunderstood. In his anguish, Job poured out his heart. He questioned the meaning of life, wished he had never been born, and pleaded with God to let him rest. This was not rebellion against the Creator, but the raw cry of a man crushed under unbearable pain. His speeches revealed the conflict of a wounded soul, unable to grasp the reason for his trial, yet still yearning for God's presence. Amid his lament, Job cried for someone who could intercede on his behalf before the Almighty, someone who could stand as an advocate, a mediator between him and God. This desperate plea foreshadowed, in a prophetic way, humanity's need for a Redeemer, pointing ahead to Christ, who would come centuries later as the one mediator between God and man. Job confessed, "If only there was someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together, someone to lay his hand upon us both." Job 9:33. Even in his despair, these words revealed that Job's hope was not entirely extinguished. His faith trembled, but it did not die. Yet his friends persisted in their accusations, repeating that his suffering was undeniable proof of guilt. Job, however, stood firm in his innocence. He was not flawless, but he had committed no sin deserving such devastation. His fiercest struggle was not only against pain, but against the silence of God, the terrifying feeling of being abandoned by the very one he sought. This tension between faith and despair, trust and questioning, made Job a mirror of the human soul searching for answers. His story reveals that even the righteous may walk through overwhelming darkness. Yet even in the shadows, a flicker of hope remains, the longing for light that refuses to be extinguished. After long exchanges between Job and his three friends, a new character emerged. Elihu, a young man who until then had remained silent. Out of respect for his elders, he had waited for them to speak first. But as he listened to their harsh accusations against Job and to Job's cries of despair, his spirit burned within him. Elihu rebuked Job's friends for failing to give a proper answer to his complaints, and at the same time, he corrected Job for seeking to justify himself rather than to uphold the righteousness of God. To Elihu, suffering was not merely punishment. It could also serve as discipline, correction, or divine revelation. In his speeches, he emphasized that God speaks in many ways, through dreams, visions, and even trials, and that suffering can open a person's ears to lessons they might otherwise ignore. Elihu offered a different perspective. He did not see Job as a wicked man deserving destruction, but neither did he believe God could be unjust. To him, something greater was at work, an unseen purpose not yet understood. Though Elihu's words did not fully relieve Job's anguish, they prepared the stage for something extraordinary. Until then, Job had spoken with men and pleaded for a divine answer. Now, after so much silence, God himself was about to speak. The arrival of Elihu marked a turning point in the narrative. After the relentless accusations of Job's friends and his own desperate cries, came the expectation of what everyone longed for, the direct response of the Creator. After long chapters of laments, accusations, and reflections, the silence of God was finally broken. The Lord answered Job, not through men, but directly, out of the whirlwind. It was the intervention Job had long awaited, though not in the way he had imagined. God did not provide direct explanations for Job's suffering. Instead, he posed a series of questions that revealed the greatness of his wisdom and the limits of human understanding. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Job 38:4-5. These questions were not meant to humiliate Job, but to remind him that the creation and governance of the universe are far beyond man's ability to grasp. God spoke of the mysteries of nature, of the seas, the rain, the stars, and the wild animals. Every detail pointed to his absolute control over all things. Job, who had once cried out for answers, now stood small before the divine majesty. The Lord showed him that life cannot be measured merely by rewards and suffering, but that there is a greater purpose hidden from human sight. God's words did not erase Job's pain in an instant, but they transformed his perspective. Job now understood that even in the midst of chaos, there was order. Even in apparent silence, there was purpose. Even when man cannot comprehend, God remains sovereign. This was the climax of the story, a direct encounter with the Creator. The answer Job received was not theoretical nor philosophical. It was the revelation of God's presence, and that changed everything. Before the majesty of God, Job finally grasped the depth of divine wisdom and the limits of human understanding. He realized that no matter how righteous he was, he could not comprehend all of God's purposes. In humility, he confessed, "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job 42:2-3. Job did not repent of hidden sins, but he acknowledged that he had tried to grasp the ungraspable. His posture of humility and trust marked the turning point in his story. He accepted that, even without understanding all the pain, God had a greater purpose, and that brought peace to his heart. Then came restoration. God restored Job's health, his possessions, his children, and his honor. Everything he had lost was multiplied. Job received twice as much as before, welcomed new sons and daughters, and lived long enough to witness generations of his family grow. This story reminds us that even in the midst of suffering, faithfulness and trust in God never go unnoticed. And just as Job found strength in God's word and divine wisdom, you too can deepen your faith and gain clarity through the scriptures. Small acts of study and reflection can transform the heart and bring light in times of darkness. The story of Job concludes not merely as an account of suffering and loss, but as a profound lesson about faith, patience, and unwavering trust in God. Job faced the complete destruction of his family, his wealth, and his health, yet he never abandoned the integrity of his heart. His life shows that true faith does not depend on immediate rewards, but on the certainty that God sees beyond our circumstances. In the end, Job was abundantly restored. Yet more important than his recovered possessions and family was the growth of his faith and the deepening of his intimacy with the Creator. He understood that the true value of life lies in trusting God, even when the reasons for pain remain beyond comprehension. This narrative inspires us to face life's challenges with a different perspective. Each difficulty can be a call to reflection, patience, and surrender. Job teaches us that even in the harshest trials, God remains sovereign and faithful, and his wisdom surpasses our understanding. Just as Job found strength in the Word and in trusting God, you too can strengthen your faith and discover guidance for difficult times. Exploring the Scriptures, meditating on their stories, and seeking understanding through reliable resources can transform the heart and illuminate your path just as it did for Job. The story of Job is an eternal reminder. Perseverance in the face of suffering reveals the greatness of faith and the care of God for those who love him.